Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all here. My name is Joshua. I'm a fourth year rabbinical student at Hebrew College. We're going to spend a few moments this morning as we reflect on the season we find ourselves in, a season of change, a season of when what was ends and when what will be begins, a season of remembering, recalling where we have been, bringing to mind exactly what it is that has brought us to this very moment. While some of us may have found ourselves standing on the shores of a parted sea, taking that first liberating step, yet found themselves standing at the mouth of an empty tomb, facing the unexpected. Find ourselves standing together, shared awe, humbled, and amazed at the realization that love can break the shackles of slavery and overcome death itself. Love can propel us forward through the uncharted wilderness, that ancient dream of a better place, promised land. We can do so alone. We can do so with our own communities. We can do so together with one another in freedom and in love, moving forward, affirming the words of the psalmist. Tov u'manayim, betachim gam yachad. How good, how sweet it is. Siblings can live together. Leah, if you would lead us in our tefillah this morning.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Boker Tov. I am honored to be leading us in prayer this morning. I'm a second-year Hebrew College rabbinical student, and we're going to start this morning with a nigun, a melody with no words, as part spiritual preparation and also as a reminder that prayer comes in many forms. Prayer comes through our hearts. Prayer comes through music with no words, and sometimes when words can't express what we want to express through prayer, we come back just to the music. So Josh will be dropping the link in for the Siddur that we'll be following this morning. So if you're just joining us, Josh will put it in there again for you. We're going to move into praising God. I thank you for my life, my body and my soul. Help me realize I am beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. I thank you for my life, my body and my soul. Help me to realize I am beautiful and whole. I am perfect the way I am and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. Whoa, 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 oh, whoa, just whoa, whoa, whoa. My body and my soul. Oh, help me to realize I am beautiful and whole. I am perfect the way I am and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh chol basar, umafli lasot. Baruch she'amar ve'haya olam, baruch hu, baruch oseh ve'reshit, baruch omer ve'oseh, baruch gozer umkayem, baruch merachem al haaretz, baruch merachem al habriot, baruch meshalem sachar tov l'reah, baruch alayv לעד וקיים לנצח, ברוך פודה ומציל ברוך שמו, ברוך אתה אדוני ימו, שירי דוד עבדך למלך אדוני אלוהינו משפחות, מאוד נגלך וישמרך, מזכיר שמך מלכינו אלוהינו, יחיד חיי העולמים, מלך משובח ומפאר עדי עד שמו הגדול, ברוך אתה אדוני מלך מהולל בתשבחות. Shama tehalel ya hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya hallelujah. Kol haneshama tehalel ya hallelujah. ישתבח שמך ליד מלכנו, האל המלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים ובארץ. כי לך נאה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שיר ושפחה, הלל וזמרה, עוז וממשלה, נצח גדולה גבורה, תהילת ותפארת קדושת מלכות, ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודעות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשירי זמרה, מלך הלכי העולמים. So we're entering now into the formal part of our Shacharit service. And we'll sing a little selection of the first prayer that comes before the Shema. And I invite you, even if the words are unfamiliar to you, to join me on the first two words, which are Hame'ir la'aretz. Hame'ir la'aretz. God illuminates the world. God lights up the world. We'll say the first 6 lines out loud together. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel. Adonai is our God. Adonai is one. And then we'll move into a few minutes of quiet prayer, personal prayer, so that we are praying alone together. So if you are praying out of your own Siddur, you can continue with the words of your own Siddur. You can pray with the words of your heart. Sit in quiet contemplation or meditation, whatever serves you this morning. And then I'll call us back with music, with the words of Oseh Shalom. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Oseh Shalom Bimromah, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Ve'imru. Oseh Shalom Bimromah, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru amen. Kaddish Yatom, Mourner's Kaddish. If it's your practice or if you are in a period of mourning, you can unmute and lead us in Kaddish Yatom.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה,
Amen.
בעלמא דברה קירותי, בהמליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
Amen. Yehesh
רבה
Mavarach Leolam Omei Omaya.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה על שמי בקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
קמה רבה מן שמיה חיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
And
Thank you, Leah, for leading us in that beautiful, moving, grounding tefillah prayer. At Hebrew College, we have a tradition of reading from the book of Bereshit, from the book of Genesis, each day's corresponding act of creation. So I'll read that in English, and we'll move on with our morning. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living beings after their kind, herd animals, creepy crawling things, and the wildlife of the earth after their kind." Vayehi chen. And it was so. God made the wildlife of the earth after their kind, and the herd animals after their kind, and all the creepy crawling things of the soil after their kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heavens, animals, all the earth, and all the crawling things that crawl about upon the earth." So God created humankind in God's image. In the image of God did he create it. Male and female, God created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, "Bear fruit and be many and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the heavens, and all living things that crawl about upon the earth." God said, "Here I give you all plants that bear seeds that are upon the face of all the earth, and all trees in which there is tree fruit that bear seeds. For you shall they be for eating. And also for all the living things of the earth, for all the fowl of the heavens, for all that crawls about upon the earth in which there is living being, all green plants for eating." And it was so. Now God saw all that God had made, and here it was tov me'od, exceedingly good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Good morning.
Good morning, Boker Tov, everyone. My name is Rabbi Or Rose, and I just want to thank my beloved students and friends, Josh and Leah, for leading this morning. Beautiful. Thank you so much for helping us to awaken to the day and to the possibilities for our gathering this morning. And I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Jackie, from Boston College. And from there, we will journey onwards.
Thank you, or good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you on this last day of winter. I'd also like to thank Joshua, Leah, and Lisa for the beautiful shahrit and just leading us into a contemplative, prayerful space this morning. So on behalf of the Planning Committee, I'd like to welcome you to the 4th annual and 2nd virtual Celebrating Easter and Passover event. As we gather this year, we can't help but be transported back to our 2020 meeting. We gathered in late March after we had planned an in-person event at Temple Beth Zion, and then pivoted quickly, and I would say pretty impressively, to a virtual format. In his opening remarks to a group of more than 100 people who gathered, our colleague Andrew Davis spoke of a real hunger in those early days of quarantine to join together for prayer, for learning, and for conversation when the feelings of isolation were so shocking and new to us all. I don't think any of us could have predicted the unfolding events of 2020, much less that would be back on Zoom a full year later, although much more adeptly. I know for me, one of the graces of the pandemic has been an appreciation for place and physical location. And I'm missing the community room of Temple Beth Zion and the sounds of voices as we greet each other. The excitement of meeting new people, the smell of the coffee and all of the delicious kosher foods spread out for brunch. But now with hope on the horizon, as the pace of vaccinations pick up, our enthusiasm for online gatherings is waning and our patience might be wearing thin. But the desire for spiritual community and connection remains strong. In a few minutes, the BU Seminary Singers will lead us in a very moving rendition of the song, I Won't Let Go. We are grateful for this opportunity to gather together as believers who, even in these troubled times, won't let go of God. And we hold on to our belief that God won't let go of us ever. The theme of this year's plenary panel, Liberating Passages, Reflections on Spirituality and Quarantine, invites us to reflect on this past year, a year like no other in recent history. So we'll hear from panelists about significant ritual moments, key insights from quarantine that they'll carry with them, and previews of how they'll celebrate Easter and Passover again this year. Thank you to the student representatives from Hebrew College, from Boston University School of Theology and Ministry, and the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry for taking part in the planning this year. After the plenary session, stretch break, and a video presentation, we'll have time for small group discussion, and the students will be guiding us in these conversations. And so now to open our program, I'll turn it over to the Seminary Singers of Boston University, who will lead us in I Won't Let Go.
All this life, all this guilt, all this grief and shame, all this night I won't let go until I know your name, know your name. Won't let go, I won't let go until you bless me, Lord. I won't let go. what you would have me do. My Lord, my God, I won't let go of you. I won't let go of you. Oh, help me sing all this night.
All this night, all my strength.
Hold on in this
Hold on
place.
in this place.
I confess now, Lord, will you
I confess
bless?
now, will you bless?
Let me see your
Let me
face.
see your
Oh,
See your
I won't let go.
Won't let go.
No, 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 I
I
won't
won't
let go.
Until you bless me,
Till you bless me, Lord. Oh, no, no, I won't let go. Till you reveal what you would have me do. My Lord, my God. I won't let go of you. Oh, no. Turn around. Have you found that God is always here? Every day, every hour, you must hang on in there. Turn around. Oh, God is saying, I won't let you go. For you're my child, and I won't let you go. No, no, you are my own, and I am sure you are my child, and I won't, and I won't, and I won't. I promise I won't let go. I won't, I won't, I won't, I won't, I won't, I won't, I won't. You are my child. You are my child. I won't let go. Oh, no, no, no. God says that you are my child, and I won't. I promise you I'll never let you go. You are my darling child. You are my sweet, sweet child. I promise that I won't let you go.
Good morning, friends. It's good to be here with you. My name is Felipe Maya, and I'm an assistant professor of theology at the Boston University School of Theology. And today I'm delighted to be here with you, and I'll be moderating our panel, Liberating Passages, Reflections on Spirituality in Quarantine. This is our conversation. This is the topic of our conversation this morning. We have asked the panelists to reflect on three related themes. First, to name a significant ritual moment that they have experienced digitally over the past year under the pandemic. Secondly, what are some of the key insights and wisdom they are carrying with them from this quarantine period and into their spiritual and religious life once we are able to gather in person again? And thirdly, how will they be celebrating Passover and Easter this year? And if there are similarities and differences with how they have done so over last year when we were still under the first weeks of the pandemic. So each panelist will have a few minutes for their reflection, And let me say that on topic comments are welcome and encouraged here in the chat. We won't have a whole lot of time for questions and conversations at the end, but if you do have a question for an individual panelist, feel free to direct those questions to me individually. At the end, I will bring them together if we have time and direct those questions to the panelists. So let me introduce our first panelist today, Dr. Soo-Jin Park, Dean of the Faculty of Boston University School of Theology. Dean Park is an expert in the history of Christianity with focus in the early modern period, the Protestant Reformation, and the history of biblical interpretation. She has taught courses on the history of Christianity, the Protestant Reformers, history of biblical interpretation, and medieval female mystics. As a teacher, Dean Park encourages her students to master not only a variety of perspectives, but also the social context whence these perspectives emerged. She prizes diversity in her teaching as well as in her scholarship. Dean Park, we're delighted to have you here, and I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here, and this has been a beautiful time of worship already. In fact, I would say this is one of the questions, a significant sort of digital experience. This has been top of the list for me. The Jewish morning prayer service was just beautiful. So I'm going to start a little bit with some backdrop because I feel I have to be honest. I have to be honest and say that the questions for the panel were challenging for me to answer because for various reasons, my worship life this past year has been embarrassingly inconsistent. This inconsistency is due to being in the middle of trying to find a church right before COVID. I was already thinking of switching churches because the church I was at was great for younger children, but not so great for teens. And I was most concerned for the formation of my teens. And so we were already kind of church hopping at that time. And so we were not rooted. I had been at my prior church for 7 years or so. And then secondly, I was at the time the academic dean at Duke Divinity School, and I had overwhelming work responsibilities because I was the person overseeing the COVID response and all the curricular adjustments. And so at the time of when the pandemic hit the United States in mid-March, or at least when everything closed down in mid-March of 2020, I was overseeing this COVID response. And as any administrator at this time will tell you, the task was all-consuming. The work was relentless, and it seemed like the boundaries of time and space were just leaking into each other. Like the work was never ending. I was working late at night, and space and time were just. And even that summer, I would say it was the first summer of having no summer, no vacation. And so I didn't really do well at keeping Sabbath, and maybe particularly keeping a regular church service going. We would have family worship service in our home on our own. Sometimes we'd get online with something. On top of that, I was in the middle of an interview for a new job and negotiations for a new job, the job that I now have as Dean of the Boston School of Theology. And so that was all in the midst of, while still running all the pressing matters of my current job. And God be praised, I got the new job. And in that midst, the job was postponed because of COVID. And so I was in this liminal space for several months between the two jobs, still having to be all in at my current job because of the COVID responsibilities. And yet my mind and my heart and my vision was already moving somewhere else. So in other words, not only was there this general disruption and disorientation of COVID, I was in the midst of a whole other layer of disruption. And I confess that while I managed to balance and maintain some consistency with many things in my life, my worship life was struggling. While my church attendance was sporadic, I did participate in the worship services at the Divinity School, the chapel services. They had 3 at that time. I tried to attend at least 1, if not 2 at a time. And I was, at this time, I was also just realizing the loss and detriment of not having carved out sacred time and space in my week. And so I would say perhaps the most significant digital worship was actually in those early months when we were all pivoting. was the early chapel services at Duke Divinity School where we rushed. I was having to oversee it, rush getting things on digitally. And we just started simply with prayer service because everybody was afraid. Everybody was disoriented. Everybody was sad and grieving. And so we just started with these prayer services, not, typical service would have had a sermon and everything. And these services really were nothing fancy. They were not at a high level. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing all the time, but they were raw and they were real, and we really connected. The Spirit met us there. We spent time of lament and petition, intercessory prayers, dispersed with spiritual scripture readings. And people just spontaneously prayed. Sometimes people spontaneously sung. And the Spirit met us there in our messiness. The Spirit met us there in our grief and our disorientation, giving light and even a lightness to the heaviness as we tried to bear one another's sorrows, disorientation, and fears. So that leads me to a key insight from quarantine. I spent this time of giving you this honest backdrop because I want to confess my failure to have for many months carve out significant sacred time and sacred space. And I came profoundly to recognize that that was a costly failure. That's a key insight that I've gained, and is the crucial importance of Sabbath keeping and a broadened and deepened and more profound understanding of just what Sabbath keeping is. That yes, church attendance is important, and I believe in that because I believe that in community, it's the only real place you have a deep formation in virtue. You don't get formed in virtue by yourself, because it's easy to be loving and forgiving and patient and kind by yourself, but you actually need community for that. And so that kind of Sabbath keeping was important. But also I came to have this profound understanding of Sabbath as an act of worship that's daily and as a place of carving out time and space. Because under COVID, the need to carve out time and space became even more necessary. And so Sabbath keeping became for me a way to create sacred time and sacred space, that you need to actually intentionally create it. And under COVID, even more so, it invited me to a different level of being, worship as a part of that, but also an understanding of Sabbath as really this profound time of carving out time and space for rest and renewal. That part of the gift of Sabbath is that it is a guilt-free, intentional time and space of rest and renewal. For somebody who's like me, who's a bit of a workaholic, who's also got perfectionistic tendencies, and I'm, feeling the overwhelming responsibility of leading my school at that time, I wasn't always having balance, and it was really hard to find guilt-free time and space. And anybody who's a faculty member knows that's the reality too, right? Everything blurs together, and you don't really, you don't know about this kind of intentional space. So I began to practice this intentional space of guilt-free. I will do something that's an act of worship of God and also care of myself. And so that might be as simple as acts to revive my body, acts to restore my soul, acts to replenish my mind, such as going for a meditative walk. I'm also a runner. I like to run. Going for a run in which I pray while I run, and do two things at once because time was hard, right? Or it could simply be like just taking time to read a good novel that just that's not work related or even research related, and to take these as intentional acts and spaces to think about rest and to do this in guilt-free spaces. So in other words, COVID forced me to rethink time, rethink sacred time and space, and gave me new understandings of boundary keeping that I hope will stay with me in these years to come. As far as how I celebrate Passover or Easter, I'm newly arrived to Boston, and I'm traveling back and forth between Durham and Boston because I have two teenage kids and they didn't move with me yet. And so it's a little bit of a crazy life, but it's been working, thank God. So I actually, I think I'm in the last few months, taking the opportunity to really get to know the church communities in Boston, because I have access to them like no other, right? With online services. And so I plan to attend, a Monday service, a Good Friday service, an Easter morning service at different places in Boston, just to get a sense of the, now that's quite different, obviously, than where I was last year. Last year, we frankly met as a family and had a family worship service. I'm in Durham, and all my family followed me here. So I'm the oldest of three. My parents are here, my brother and sister are here. And so we have a wide extended family. And that's also likely what we'll also do again this year, is to have a family worship service. So that's enough from me.
Thank you, Dean Park. Our second panelist today is Dr. Daniel Daly, Associate Professor of Moral Theology at Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. Dr. Daly is experienced as a clinical medical ethicist and served on the ethics committees of the Catholic Medical Center and the Elliott Hospital in Manchester, New Hampshire. He's also a member of the Catholic Health Association's Theologian and Ethicist Committee. And Dr. Daly is also an active member of the Catholic Theological Society of America, the Society of Christian Ethics, and the Catholic Theological Ethics in the World Church Initiative. Dr. Daly, thank you for your presence. Welcome to our conversation.
Thank you, Felipe. And I'd like to thank Andrew Davis and Jackie Regan for the invite. And that BU chorus, and that was so moving. I mean, it's how do we follow it up? Well, here goes. I think we do need some signs of hope, and we need to take some lessons away, and I'll hopefully draw on some of my experiences during the pandemic to the lessons that I've drawn. But I just want to start by acknowledging just how awful this time has been, just how awful this year has been. The loss of life, the loss of connection to others, the loss of educational experiences has been really profound. And for me, really unfathomable. I don't think I've come to grips with just how much loss we've all encountered. And to that point, my 7-year-old keeps asking me, I've got two kids, my wife and I have two kids, a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And the 7-year-old keeps asking, if God can do anything and God loves us, why doesn't God stop this? We tell him God is all powerful and God loves us, all of us, unconditionally. And so he's putting these together. I mean, he's a real budding theologian, much sharper than his father. And he's beginning to realize that there are no good answers to what Gabriel Marcel called the mystery of evil. It's not the problem of evil, because problems are things that can be solved. We can't solve this. Mysteries are things we enter into, we experience. And I think we are living in a time in which the mystery of evil is pretty apparent. The prompt that I'm going to focus on is the second question. So I'm not going to take the first and the third. What is one key insight from quarantine that you'll carry with you into your spiritual religious life when we can safely gather in person again? And so I'll answer this by telling you the story of my friend Mike. So I'll preface the story by saying I grew up in Boston, and Mike and I and a group of about 10 friends have been friends for about 35 years. I'm incredibly blessed to have this group of friends. We remain close, see each other, relatively regularly. And I was lucky enough to I'm from Boston and I'm at Boston College, a relative rarity in the academic world that you can teach where you grew up, but I've been lucky in that way. So in mid-April, right in the darkest period of the quarantine, when the lockdown was the most severe, Mike came to my house unannounced. Knocked on the door at about 9 at night, cold April night. I go outside. We're not going to meet inside at this point. I go outside. We start to chat, and I can tell that something's off. Something's a little wrong. That he was struggling with the lockdown, with the isolation. He lived alone. He wasn't around peers. All of his friends are married with children, so they're keeping some distance from everybody. Each household is in its own pod at this point. But I could tell something was off. And I can tell you about Mike, he is the funniest, most social, most generous, thoughtful friend you could have. I could tell you stories for hours about him that would leave you in stitches. He is a charismatic figure. My father always said he was my alter ego. You know, he would get me to do the crazy things like jump off a bridge into a river that I would never do. And he would get me to do these things. I mean, always, you know, just an incredible friend in that way. Drew me out in different ways in my life. And just universally beloved. This guy, you know, had more friends, more people loved him. He was just so beloved. So that night we chatted for about 4 hours, well past midnight over a couple of beers. And again, I could sense that I thought he was probably depressed. He might be, you know, have some mild depression. And at the end of this whole thing, he asks if he can give me a hug. And so at this point, if you remember April, I mean, there's no contact between people outside of household. And so the epidemiologists are so clear about touching at this point. And I believe this is even, it might have been even before the mask mandates, you know, before we learned about masks. So the touching was the real important thing at this point. You know, I could tell this guy was struggling a lot, and my heart was broken. And so I gave him a hug. You know, we told each other we loved each other and that we'd keep in touch. And we did. And I told my wife, and she understood. And, you know, we were careful after that. I made sure that I wasn't going to bring it into my household. But it was clear he needed some human contact. So I saw him throughout the summer and fall, actually more than I normally did, which was really a blessing. Reached out and we stayed in contact. And he seemed to improve as time went on. And, you know, especially as the world opened up a bit. And I would try to pull out of him what was going on with him. And he wouldn't let me in. He wouldn't, in fact, he didn't let any of his friends in. He didn't let any of us know the depths of his depression. So he came by again in mid-October. We had a great time. It was, you know, I felt like he was returning back to the Mike that I really knew. I now know that he came by to say goodbye to me. He couldn't wait for the human connection that he needed. He couldn't wait for that to return. In early November, he took his own life. The question that was posed was, you know, what are the lessons when we can safely gather again in person? Which is normally a very, very good thing. I think masks and COVID safety is incredibly important. I'm a medical ethicist. This is near and dear to my heart. But what I learned was that sometimes we need to unsafely gather in person. Rare times, but there are going to be times in our lives. Mike needed more of that. Now, I've come to realize in a really visceral way, in an embodied way, and in a way that you can only gain through experience, that health and safety is only a relative good. And sometimes we need to gather together and risk our health for the good of others. Now, I'm not calling for us, you know, to do this in a not completely unreasonable way at all, but there are going to be certain times and places. Because for Mike, the lack of connection to human beings was deadlier than COVID would be to him. I'm convinced of that at this point. You know, I wished I had hugged him more. All of my friends do. We regularly talk about what we would do differently back then. Now, those of you who have lost someone to suicide know exactly what I'm talking about. You continually replay your interactions with these people, what you could have said, what you could have done that may have made a difference, or at least would have let him know just how much he was loved, even if it wasn't going to make a difference for the final outcome. Because COVID wasn't the primary cause of his suicide. Ultimately, it was his depression that went untreated, that he was, for a variety of reasons, did not want to disclose and did not want treatment for. But it certainly exacerbated. It was the match in many ways. Again, that's my armchair analysis. So, health is not an absolute good. Love is. True friendship is. That's where we're going. That's what the kingdom is about. Friendship with God and neighbor. So epidemiologists are incredibly important, and they can tell us how we contract COVID. They can tell us how we spread it. But they can't tell us what makes life worth living or risks we should take for the sake of our friends who suffer. They can't tell us that. They can't tell us how to follow the example of Jesus or St. Francis or St. Damien of Molokai, Hawaii, all of whom embraced lepers. And St. Francis and Damien contracted the disease. Likely that, Francis likely died of leprosy. Damien certainly did. So, my takeaway is, just how much we need to embrace the suffering. I'm really focusing a lot on that and the risks that we sometimes, not all the time, we may have to take in order to do that. And so in your prayer today, I would just ask you to hold Michael Finnern, my dear friend, in your heart, in your prayer. Thank you.
Perhaps a deep breath is in order right now for all of us. Our third panelist for this morning is Dr. Susie Tencho, who is the Vice President of Community Education at Hebrew College. Originally from Cape Town, South Africa, where she attended Jewish day school. Dr. Tencho moved to Boston in 1988 to attend Brandeis University, where she received her undergraduate and graduate degrees. She has worked in K through 12 pluralistic Jewish education for more than 25 years, including in Prostor, a high school program connected to Hebrew College. She is also the founding faculty member and associate head of school at Gun Academy, and most recently the head at Boston's Jewish Community Day School for almost a decade. And throughout her career, she has taught a variety of adult education classes and was a recipient of the 2018 Covenant Award for Jewish Educators. Dr. Tencho, so glad to meet you and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really my heart is still breaking from that previous story. I don't quite know how to make the transition, truthfully, but I'm struck by the honesty of both Dean Pack and what just preceded also. So really, I'm honored to be with you all. In some ways, my story actually touches on both of those that preceded it, in part because I too changed jobs in this period, and not cities, thank God, but jobs, and also have been thinking a lot about mental health and what people need during this time. So I'll start my story a year ago when I was head of a Jewish day school in Boston and had to figure out sort of how to lead this community through this unprecedented and very difficult time, with the awareness that that children need community. Children need to be with other children. And though I wasn't necessarily prepared for a pandemic, as they prepare you to lead a school, they don't mention that there might be a pandemic. But and also it was the last 4 months of my tenure, and so I, in my naivete, had imagined that this was going to be a period of winding down and of kind of simplicity and just kind of relaxing and saying goodbye to people and transitioning the role. And but God and the world had other plans, and so instead I spent my last 4 months building a new school online and trying to lead and hold a community through that very difficult transition. And so, like Dean Pack, I didn't have a lot of time to think about my own life and what I needed. I think, always leaders struggle with a balance between authenticity and responsibility. And how do you hold a community even as you're trying to hold your own emotions? And I imagine for many of you who lead communities and do pastoral care, that there is this balance that we need to constantly strike between what we're giving to others and what we need for ourselves. And so truthfully, the rituals that gave me comfort in those early days were creating rituals for the community that were familiar, that there was comfort in familiarity. And so when we opened school online, and I was very clear with both our children and our parent body to say, the school building is closed, but school is still open. And that was a very important distinction, because everybody kept talking about schools closing. And I said, school is not closing. Our building is closing, but school is open. And what I meant by that was our community is still open. And we actually named our online school. Many schools were talking about kind of their school in the clouds. And I said, no, we are going to be a kahila makusheret, a connected community, because I really was cognizant of the fact that we needed to remain connected even as we were moving apart. And so, and I also like the pun of connection online and all of that, but it really was about giving a message of connection, because in those first days of isolation, we were going nuts. People need to be in connection with one another. And so we started with the same prayers and songs online in our opening assembly as we do at the beginning of the school year, because it was a reset, but I wanted it to be a reset in the context of what they knew already, of what has given us so much hope and love and connection for so many years prior to that. And so that was really the early days. And Passover fell just a couple of weeks after that. We closed right between the holiday of Purim, which is kind of a fun, upside down, crazy time, and closed right before the Passover vacation of really kind of thinking about a journey of from slavery to liberation. And we were not feeling liberated. And so the rituals of Passover last year, I actually sent a video to my community and talked about Viktor Frankl saying to us, the message from the Holocaust of the last freedom we have is to choose our attitude of how we respond to events. And talking about that, this was a moment of understanding freedom in new ways, because we weren't going to be free to celebrate with other people the way that we did. Ironically, as was mentioned, I came from Cape Town, South Africa. I lived in a different country from my parents for 16 years. We weren't able to celebrate Passover at the same table, and I wasn't doing Zoom there was no Zoom and there was no sharing of, and so I hadn't been in the same place as them for many years, and suddenly there was this opportunity to gather people together in a whole new way, and so I was quite excited to do that. It was deeply meaningful for me to have my family at my Seder table, even though they weren't in the same room, because I hadn't had that for so long, and that was very special to me. But as the year wore on, I got tired. I'm tired of Zoom. With all due respect to this gathering, I'm tired of Zoom. I'm tired of teaching over Zoom. I want to be back with people, and so what I have found this Pesach is that I'm actually drawing on some of my learnings from the course of the year, which one is I have been outside and closer to nature than I have ever been in my life. I bought what I call long johns. I don't think they call them long johns in America. I bought thermal underwear stuff that I could wear outside. I have spent more time with friends outside during these months than I ever imagined would be possible. I take walks every morning, early in the morning when it's quiet, because that's where I feel like I can be alone with my thoughts and kind of some calm and some connection to God and to myself about what's going on. And I hope that I'm able to take that with me into next winter, because I've lived in this country. I've lived in Boston in these winters for many years. I've never done it. So I hope that I will take that experience with me, because it's so enriching. I hope too that I appreciate the togetherness. You know, we had our high holy days of the Jewish New Year and the Day of Atonement on Zoom. And by the time we got to the Day of Atonement, I said to my wife, no, I'm not doing it on Zoom. There is a pull to be in community, but there is a pull to have a more meaningful experience. And that was just with my own family and my own nuclear family. And so this Pesach, as opposed to last Pesach where I brought everybody together on Zoom, this Pesach, we're having first night just with my wife and our child. And second night is going to be with our synagogue community. I usually run a Seder and this year what I've decided to do is I taught 2 adult education courses this week on the development of the Haggadah and responses to Haggadah. And I'm going to retreat just into my family as a way of kind of renewing. And Passover is also the beginning of a Jewish New Year, a different beginning to a Jewish New Year. And so just to take the time to just refresh and renew, because that is what I need as spring is sprouting all around us. I need a little time of a break, convening with nature, and then hopefully entering this new period of liberation with a refreshed spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me put all 3 of you in conversation and bring all of you into the spotlight here and see if you all have any responses to what you have heard, any additional thoughts that you would like to share to one another, or things that came to your mind as we were in conversation.
Well, I'll go. You know, what I appreciated about both of your, Dean Pak and Susie, your talk, was just the honesty. I mean, just how difficult this has been. Obviously the story that I brought to us is, and I hesitated to bring it because I thought, this is heavy, but I just kept coming. This is my experience of the pandemic. This is, I didn't come out of it okay. I'm not, I certainly there are some silver linings. I've spent more time with my wife and kids than I ever would have had otherwise. And I'm so deeply grateful for that. But, I mean, our lives have been completely upended. And when you lose a dear friend, or so many people have lost parents or grandparents or spouses, siblings, we're changed forever. There's before the pandemic and there's after the pandemic, and they're 2 different times of our lives. At least that's been my experience, and that's what I've heard from many people. So I guess we're not alone in that. We're not alone.
Yeah, Daniel, the thing that I talk to the parents of my school community about all the time was about how we created an online school, but I really didn't care so much about the academic learning. What really mattered was kids' mental health. And what kids needed to be okay was what was paramount. Because I know this is heretical to say the head of school, but whether you do one math problem more or one math problem less actually doesn't matter. What matters is being present for people and helping them navigate the complexity of their experience.
We have a question here from Stephanie. How do you hold together the personal and the systemic with the re-emergence into the new normal, if there will be a new normal? So how are you thinking about that? Any thoughts on this difficult tension between the impact that the pandemic had on the individual and also on a more systemic level?
May I just pick up on what Dr. Tanchel mentioned? I think, as an administrator, we already knew mental health questions are very important. And I think, COVID just really sheds a clear light on that. And that's both personal and systemic. And so, really thinking intentionally about more holistic support for students, for faculty, for staff. It's not just students, right? And really taking the learnings of that, we have to think about even coming back. It's going to be a different kind of, maybe even trauma or at least adjustment to come back, right? We have been a year of being isolated and hardly touching, except for the members of our household, and then to suddenly be back in a room filled with people. I think it's, thinking about those matters of how do you gently shepherd things back and not assume that a normal is going to be the same normal. That really will be a new normal, and being very attentive to the needs of the community and the ways of gently adjusting and readjusting.
Yeah, when I think about the personal and the communal, I think that we have to take care of ourselves as individuals, else we will be no good to anybody else. I think that that also is a learning here, that self-care matters, and it matters a lot. And then thinking about what the community is going to need, I've been wondering about whether the word trauma is an apt word for what we've endured in this last year, and that trauma isn't easily forgotten, and it's remembered actually in our bodies. And so I'm hoping that communities, educational communities, communities of faith are going to remember, even as they're thinking about minds and souls, that they think about bodies too, and how they're going to help people hold the experience and move through this experience. I think schools and communities of faith are going to really have to respond to this. They can't just go back to the curriculum as normal, because people's hearts won't be available to learn in the same way. They won't be available to be present in the same way until what they've experienced in the last year has been responded to.
One comment that I did have, and like your comments is allowing me to crystallize that. When we were meeting as a teaching, as a planning team for this event, we were thinking about, this image of the passage, right? That marks the period of Pesach and Passover, Easter. And we weren't sure what what is the passage exactly? And we were sort of lingering on that uncertainty because we don't know. And I think what I'm hearing from all of you is the ability to be honest about that uncertainty. And it feels different to me, at least, and in a very good way, to celebrate Passover, Easter with that in mind, right? With the ability to say that this was really, really awful, and not be in the pursuit of just lessons that will solve this pandemic, because I think we're wrestling with issues that are unsolvable. As Dr. Daly said, it's the mystery. It's not a problem that we can actually offer a solution, but it's on that level of, it was so painful, and the wreckage that we have experienced over the past year. So I'm learning with you and sort of crystallizing that image of the importance of the metaphor of the passage, not of the end goal of the arrival, but of some form of lingering with the passage there. Very well. Let me ask if the three of you have any final thoughts. We are about to enter our stretch break. Any final comments from you?
I'll just say, be gentle with yourselves and carve out intentional time of worship and intentional time of self-care. And that even acts of self-care, not even, they are, part of your worship of God.
Amen.
And I would just say, this has been great. And I don't think I realized how much I needed something like this until I came here. So thank you to all of you. I mean, as you process what's happened to us over this past year, yeah, this has been great. This is probably the moment of digital, connection with God that I felt the most over the past year, to be honest, because I hadn't really felt it at all. I think until I heard that the BU chorus, to be honest, to hear them sing, and then this conversation now. So thank you to all of you.
For all of us in the room, will you join me in thanking our panelists for their wisdom? Thank you. Very well. Rest is part of our program. It's part of our task. We've been talking about that. So we'll take 5 minutes for a stretch break, and we'll be back and resume our program after that.
La la la, la la la, ay la la, ay la la, la did I la 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 la. Ay la la, ay la 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 la. Ay la 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 la. Ay la la, ay la la. La la, la la la, ay la la, ay la la. Did it I la 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 la, I la la, I la la, la la. Ay la la, ay la la, ay la la.
What the fuck is that?
Ay la la, la. morning, everyone. For those of you that I don't yet know, my name is Rabbi Or Rose, and I have the pleasure of directing the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership at Hebrew College, and working with the wonderful folks from these three institutions to piece together programs like this. And I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that was involved in planning, presenting, singing, crying, smiling, tapping, commenting, all of the ways in which we are seeking to create community together in this strange, liminal, and still very painful time. One of the goals of the program is to try and offer all of us different modalities through which to enter this fraught conversation. We all come to it with such mixed emotions, and we are multifaceted beings. Before we even think about the plurality of the world, each of us, of course, is a world unto ourself. In the Jewish tradition, we describe the human being as an olam katan, a world in miniature. And so we want to try and engage ourselves through music, through prayer, through speech, through song. And in this piece, leading into small group conversation, we wanted to include a short video presentation. It's a preview of a photographic exhibit by a dear friend and supporter of the work of the Miller Center and of our schools together, a woman named Brenda Bansell, who is herself a graduate of Harvard Divinity School and a professional photographer. And over the last few months, Brenda has been gathering a huge number of photographs from across the world and from our perch in Boston of the ways in which different people, individually and in community, however altered those communities might be, of expressing their spiritual commitments. And so the title of her exhibit, which will be unveiled next month at Hebrew College, where there'll be opportunities to sign up in small numbers to experience it in person, is called Faith in Isolation Expressed. And when Tom and I put together the photographs and selected music, we selected a piece from another friend and teacher of ours from the West Coast, Cantor Donnie Massing. And the song that you'll hear references the angel. And for those that are familiar with Passover and the story of Exodus, of course, the angel of death plays a very significant role in that founding myth of ours. The plagues, the death of the firstborn, passing over is a reference, of course, to the protection that was granted to the Israelite slaves during that 10th most devastating of those plagues. And so we thought it would be appropriate to pair these photographs with a contemporary midrash, in essence, a contemporary interpretation by a British singer-songwriter that Donnie discovered and has become a part of his Passover experience. As you look and listen to the exhibit and to the sounds, and you think about the discussions of this morning and the opportunity to be in conversation with peers, I just want to add one element to the thread of conversation about the personal and the collective, which is sometimes we say we're all in this together. And that is true, but it is also not true. It's true in the sense that I hope and pray we are recognizing more deeply than ever just how interconnected we are biologically and otherwise. We are inseparable. We are all a part of the great weave of creation. And I hope and pray that we carry that forward. But what we've also recognized, and I hope we give greater attention, not just through words, but through deeds, is that being a person of color, being a person who is economically underprivileged, being a person who is a foreigner who doesn't have access because of language barriers or other cultural experiences to what we regard as the norms, quote unquote, of American society, means that people are experiencing this pandemic in many different ways. And that is something that I think we as teachers and preachers, as counselors and activists and artists really need to continue to contemplate and to think about how that too must change. I think it's appropriate to refer to the last year as a time of multiple pandemics. There is, of course, the global health crisis, but what has been unearthed and exacerbated, of course, are the long-standing illnesses of structural racism, of misogyny, ableism. And so we are beautiful and we are broken. And I think that sensibility and the responsibility that comes with it needs to be a part of this conversation. And it isn't dichotomous. We are equipped to do the inner work and the outer work, what we call in the Jewish tradition tikkun hamidot and tikkun olam, the repair of our beings, body and spirit, and the repair that's necessary in the world. So with thanks to Brenda, a wonderful fellow traveler, I'm going to ask Tom to share the video and the music, and I hope that you find it as touching as I do. Tom and I think, would rank putting together the photos and the music one of the important digital experiences that we experienced as a chavruta, an unlikely pair of seekers and learners trying to give voice somehow to the Torah of this experience through a very different modality than either of us is used to or were trained to by and large in seminary or graduate school. So Tom, if you would, take it away.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2. The angel passed over me. It says in these ancient texts, each year I'm reminded to remind myself I'm still feeling the effects, though it doesn't make any rational sense, and there's no admissible evidence. I'm sticking to my story. The angel passed over me. The angel passed over me last night when I was asleep, and I woke with a start and a pounding heart from a dream so vivid
wide and deep. Nothing had changed in the room at all, just some clouds across the face of the moon, that's all. And though I didn't actually see, the angel passed over me. The angel passed over me, and I'm grateful, truly am, to be given the chance to continue the dance for as long as I have, for as long as I can. For every birth there must be a death, for every first there's a last breath. And I don't know when that's going to be, or why the angel passed over me. Why the angel passed over me. The angel passed over me.
Just take a moment to breathe and Tom, if you would, please lead us into the small group discussion. And thanks in advance to the students that are helping to facilitate these groups. If at all possible, I know that people have different thresholds for Zoom and video. If you're able, I think it would be helpful if you're in a small group to turn your camera on so that people can see each other. We can't touch each other and we're already at a distance. So if there are ways to connect, I would respectfully ask, but also understanding that we are zoomed out. Tom.
I hope you all had wonderful and fruitful and enlightening conversations in your small groups. I invite us now to gather for our closing ritual. And the inspiration for this closing ritual came out of, I'm still lingering in Black History Month, which was February. We sort of joke in our community, how come we got the shortest month? But every month is Black History Month. And as we now move into March, which is designated as Women's History Month, again, every month is Women's History Month. And is there even a month designated for Jewish history? Not on the calendar, but every month is Jewish History Month. So it's inspired by some of the ways that we observe. I came to mind Phyllis Wheatley. And so we're going to use some of her poetry for our closing. Next slide. But before we get into the poetry by Phyllis Wheatley, it's still on my mind, the events of a few days ago. And it's taken a while for us to learned the names of the persons who were killed in Atlanta on Wednesday. And I wanted us to, now that we know many of their names, to say their names in our hearts, and to think about their families, their loved ones, their communities, and to hold them in our hearts and in our prayers in the days to come. So I will say their names. And I apologize if I am not pronouncing them correctly, but my heart is in the right place. Zhao Ji Tan, Dao Yu Feng, Paul Andre Michaels, Delana Ashley Young, Soon C. Park, Hyun Yong Park Grant, Suncha Kim, Yang Ye, and our prayers go to Alcius Hernandez Ortiz, who survived the shooting. Next slide, please. Imagination. Who can sing thy force, or who describe the swiftness of thy course? Soaring through air to find the bright abode, the ephemeral palace of the thundering God. We on thy pinions can surpass the wind and leave the rolling universe behind. From star to star, the mental optics rove, measure the skies and range the realms above. There in one view, we grasp the mighty whole, or with new worlds, amaze the unbounded soul. This is an excerpt from Phyllis Wheatley's book of poetry. Next slide, please. Phyllis Wheatley was born free in West Africa in 1753. She was kidnapped at the age of 7 and stuffed in the bowels of a ship named the Phyllis, and she survived the Middle Passage and was then enslaved by a Bostonian family named the Wheatleys. So that is what they called her, Phyllis Wheatley. They stole her body and her name, but they could not steal her mind. She mastered the English language in mere months, then Greek and Latin too. A genius. She went on to become the first Black woman or man in America to publish a book titled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral. It was a book of poetry. Next slide. This is a very short portion of a letter that Phyllis sent to the Right Honorable William, Earl of Dartmouth. I, young in life, by seeming cruel fate, was snatched from Afric's fancied happy seat. What pangs excruciating must molest? What sorrows labor in my parents' breast? Stilled was that soul, and by no misery moved, that from a father seized his babes beloved. Such my case. And can I then but pray others may never feel tyrannic sway? Next slide, please. This is a quote from another letter that Phyllis wrote to a pastor, a Presbyterian minister, in 1774. In every breast, in every human breast, God has implanted a principle, which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance. The same principle lives in us. So as we take a few moments to listen to the music of Sweet Honey in the Rock, I invite you to think about and reflect on Phyllis Wheatley's words, and to also think about your takeaway from our morning together. And we invite you to place in the chat your thoughts and reflections on what you are taking away from our gathering today.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandmother's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dust, sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of light, and builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith, makers of peace, wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We're mothers of courage and fathers of time. We're daughters of dust and sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We're lovers of light and builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We're makers of peace and wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are one.
And I send you forth with these words from James Weldon Johnson. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in thy path, we pray. Amen. So be it.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to everybody who helped lead today, our breakout session discussion leaders, Charlene, Jackie, and our panelists. It's been a wonderful day, and I will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the YouTube. I hope to have this on YouTube today or Monday, the recording, if you want to watch any piece again or revisit. But thank you all for being together. Shabbat Shalom to those entering the Sabbath this afternoon, and many blessings as we enter into Pesach and Holy Week and Easter. Thank you all.